Goldie Stephens had spent the entire afternoon preparing Grant's birthday dinner, believing just for one night that her family might feel whole again. The candles were lit, the table was set, and their children, Liam and Sophie, were laughing in the living room. But everything changed the moment Grant walked in, with Olivia Carter at his side. He didn't even look at Goldie, not once. Instead, he smiled at Olivia like she belonged there more than his own wife ever did. And in front of their children, Grant said the words that shattered everything. "She understands my life better than you ever did." Goldie froze, realizing this wasn't just betrayal, it was replacement. Have you ever seen someone you love slowly choose another life in front of your eyes? Stay with this story until the end, because what happens that night will change everything for Goldie and for her children. The silence after Grant's words didn't end that night. It settled into the house like a second layer of air, heavy, invisible, and impossible to escape. Goldie Stephens moved through the rest of the birthday dinner like a ghost in her own life. She smiled when Liam asked for cake. She nodded when Sophie talked about school. She even laughed once softly when she thought she was supposed to. But inside, something had already fractured. Grant sat at the head of the table like nothing had happened. Olivia Carter sat beside him, perfectly composed, her hands folded lightly as if she belonged there by design. Every now and then she would lean in and whisper something to Grant that made him smile, an easy, familiar smile Goldie hadn't seen in months. It wasn't just betrayal anymore, it was routine. After dinner, Goldie stood in the kitchen rinsing plates that didn't feel real in her hands. The sound of water running filled the silence Grant refused to acknowledge. He walked in, loosening his tie. "You didn't have to do all this," he said flatly, as if she were an employee who had overworked herself. Goldie didn't turn around. "It's your birthday." Grant leaned against the counter. "It's just another day." That sentence hurt more than the dinner. She finally looked at him. "Then why bring her here?" For a second, something flickered in his expression, annoyance, maybe even discomfort. But it vanished quickly. "Olivia is part of my team," he said. "You're reading too much into it again. Reading too much into it again." That phrase was becoming a pattern. Goldie placed a plate down carefully. "She doesn't feel like just a co-worker." Grant sighed like she was exhausting him. "Goldie, I don't have energy for emotional assumptions tonight." He walked out before she could respond. And just like that, the conversation ended the way all of them had begun to end, with her standing alone in the middle of something that used to be shared. Over the next few days, the shift became undeniable. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quieter than that. It was in the way Grant stopped asking her about her day, in the way he started checking his phone during dinner, in the way Olivia's name appeared more often in conversations that used to belong to Goldie. At breakfast on Tuesday morning, Liam sat scrolling through his tablet when he suddenly said, "Olivia said my math approach is wrong." Goldie looked up from her coffee. "Olivia helped you with math, she video called me," Liam replied casually. "Dad said she's good at explaining things." Grant didn't even look up from his newspaper. "She is." Goldie's hand tightened around her mug. "Since when does she tutor him?" Grant folded the paper. "Since she offered." That was the second time he had made it sound simple, as if life-altering changes in their home were just logistics. By Thursday, Olivia Carter had become a presence without needing to physically be there. Sophie mentioned her name while drawing at the kitchen table. "Olivia says pink and blue look better together," she said proudly, coloring a house that didn't look like anything Goldie would have chosen. Goldie knelt beside her. "Since when did Olivia become your art teacher?" Sophie shrugged. "She's nice. She listens." That word "listens" landed like a quiet accusation. Goldie had listened for years. But suddenly it didn't seem to count. That evening, Goldie found Grant in his home office. The door was half open and she heard Olivia's voice before she saw her face. I think it's better if we start integrating things slowly, Olivia was saying through the speakerphone. Grant leaned back in his chair. She's adapting slower than expected. Goldie stopped in the hallway. Olivia's voice continued calm and controlled. It's normal. Emotional resistance is common in situations like this. Situations like this. Goldie felt her stomach tighten. Grant replied, "She's always been emotional." A pause. Then Olivia gently, "That's why the transition matters." Goldie stepped back before they could hear her breathing. Transition. That was the word they were using for her life. The next morning, Ms. Reynolds, Sophie's teacher, greeted Goldie at school pickup with polite confusion. "Oh, you must be Olivia's mother," she asked warmly. Goldie blinked. "I'm Sophie's mother." The teacher hesitated. "Of course I'm sorry, Olivia Carter has been attending most of the parent communications lately." Goldie felt her throat tighten. "I wasn't informed of that," she said quietly. Miss Reynolds looked uncomfortable. "I assumed it was arranged with your husband." Of course it was. Everything was being arranged, just not with her. That night, Goldie tried to talk to Grant again. He was standing by the kitchen island, typing on his phone. "We need to set boundaries," she said carefully. Grant didn't look up. "Boundaries for what?" "For Olivia," Goldie replied. That finally made him pause. He set his phone down slowly. "You're still stuck on this. I'm stuck on the fact that she's becoming part of our family without anyone asking me." Grant exhaled sharply. "This is exactly what I mean, Goldie. You turn every small thing into a crisis." "It's not small," she said, voice trembling now. "She's in our children's lives more than I am." That line finally made him look at her, but not with concern, with irritation. "You're overreacting," he said. "Liam and Sophie like her because she's calm. Not everything is a competition." Goldie's voice broke slightly. "I'm their mother." "And you're still their mother," Grant replied coldly. "But you're making everything harder than it needs to be." Silence hit again. Then he added softer but more dangerous. "Try to adjust." That word again. Adjust. Like she was a problem that needed correction, not a person being replaced. Later that night, Goldie sat alone in Sophie's bedroom watching her sleep. The room was quiet, except for the soft rhythm of breathing. For a moment, she let herself remember who she used to be before this, before Olivia, before silence, before being told she was too emotional in her own home. A mother, a wife, someone who mattered. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from Liam Mom Olivia said she can help me pick my science project. Is that okay? Goldie stared at the screen for a long time. Then she typed, "I'll help you tomorrow." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Then finally, Dad already said yes to Olivia. Goldie lowered the phone slowly. And in that moment, she understood something she hadn't wanted to see. She wasn't being pushed out all at once. She was being replaced, one permission at a time. Downstairs, Grant's voice echoed faintly as he laughed at something Olivia said on the phone. It was an easy laugh, the kind Goldie used to hear when she was the one he chose. She stood up slowly, looking out the bedroom window into the dark suburban street. Everything looked normal, too normal. But inside her chest, something no longer felt survivable. And somewhere deep inside that silence, a thought began to form, not loud, not sharp, but steady. If they're building a new life without me, then I need to decide what mine looks like without them. By the time Monday arrived, Goldie Stephens had already begun to feel it, this strange, suffocating shift where she still lived inside her home, but no longer inside her family. It wasn't that anyone told her she didn't belong. It was that no one needed her to belong anymore. Grant had left early that morning without breakfast, leaving only the faint smell of coffee and the sound of his phone vibrating with messages Goldie no longer asked about. Liam and Sophie were already dressed, their backpacks ready by the door, organized in a way that no longer required her help. And Olivia Carter's name had already been mentioned twice before 8 a.m., once by Liam, once by Grant. Goldie stood at the kitchen counter watching the clock tick like it was measuring something she couldn't stop losing. At school, drop-off everything became painfully clear in ways Goldie hadn't expected. Grant was already there, leaning casually against his car. Olivia stood beside him, holding a folder filled with papers Goldie had never seen before. Liam ran toward Grant first. Sophie followed, but halfway she hesitated. Then, unexpectedly, Sophie turned slightly toward Olivia instead. "Olivia," she called, smiling. Goldie felt something crack quietly in her chest. She stepped forward. "Good morning, sweetheart." Sophie turned back, almost apologetic. "Oh, hi, Mom." Almost. That word hit harder than anything Grant had ever said. Grant didn't look at her, not even a glance. Instead, he was already talking to Olivia. "She's been struggling with transitions," he said casually, as if Goldie wasn't standing right there. Olivia nodded thoughtfully. "That's understandable. Change affects children differently." Goldie froze. They were discussing her children. Without her. About her. As if she were an external factor in her own family. At school, Ms. Reynolds approached them during morning drop-off with a familiar smile. "Olivia, I've updated the volunteer schedule you requested," she said warmly. Goldie turned sharply. "You requested a volunteer schedule?" she asked. Olivia smiled politely, smooth and practiced. "Just trying to help with classroom consistency," Grant added without hesitation. "She's been coordinating most of the school communications." Goldie stared at him. "Why wasn't I told?" Grant finally looked at her, but his expression was tired, like she was repeating a question he had already dismissed in his mind. "It's just organization, Goldie. Not everything needs approval meetings. Not everything needs her." That was the sentence he didn't say. But she heard it anyway. Later that afternoon, Goldie returned home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but not empty. Olivia was in the kitchen, wearing an apron, cooking, like she lived there. Goldie stopped in the doorway. Olivia turned, smiling like this was completely normal. "Oh, hi, Goldie. I hope you don't mind I started prepping dinner." Grant said he'd be late again. Goldie didn't move. "You're cooking in my kitchen." Olivia tilted her head slightly. "It's just dinner. The kids were hungry last time I was here, so I thought—" "This is not your home," Goldie interrupted. The words came sharper than she intended. For the first time, Olivia's smile flickered, but only for a second. Then she softened her voice. "I understand this is difficult for you." Goldie laughed once, short, bitter. "Do you?" Olivia placed the spoon down carefully. "I think you're feeling replaced." The honesty of it made Goldie's stomach twist. But Olivia wasn't finished. "I'm not trying to replace you," she added gently. "I'm just filling gaps that already existed." Gaps. As if Goldie had been missing all along. That evening, Grant arrived home later than usual. He walked into the kitchen, saw Olivia finishing dinner, and didn't react like anything was unusual. Goldie stood by the counter watching them. Liam and Sophie were already seated, laughing softly at something Olivia had said. Grant loosened his tie. "Smells good." Olivia smiled. "I made your favorite." Goldie spoke quietly. "You made his favorite. In my house." Grant finally looked at her, tired, impatient. "Goldie?" He said, "This is exactly what I mean. You create tension where there doesn't need to be any." "I create tension," she repeated. "You're making Olivia uncomfortable," he added. That sentence landed like a slap. Goldie blinked. "I'm making her uncomfortable." Olivia quickly stepped in, softening the moment. "It's okay, Grant. I understand her emotions are heightened right now." Her emotions, not her reality, not her situation. Her emotions. Goldie felt something inside her shift, not explode, not break, but detach, quietly, dangerously. Later that night, Goldie stood in Liam's room while he worked on homework. "Did you ask Olivia for help again today?" she asked gently. Liam didn't look up. "Yeah," she explained fractions better. Goldie nodded slowly. "And me." He paused. That pause was the answer. Finally, he said, "Dad says Olivia is better at staying calm when I get frustrated." Goldie felt her throat tighten. "I can stay calm," she said softly. Liam shrugged. "You just get emotional." The word again, emotional, like it was a flaw, not a feeling, not a response to being erased. A flaw. Down the hallway, Sophie was on her tablet FaceTiming Olivia. Goldie stopped outside the door. Sophie was laughing. Not the polite kind of laugh, the kind children give someone they trust. Goldie heard Olivia's voice through the speaker. "Did you like the dinner I made?" Sophie nodded enthusiastically. "It was the best pasta ever." Goldie stepped into the room. Sophie looked up quickly. "Hi, Mum." But her attention didn't fully leave the screen. Goldie swallowed. "Sweetheart, I wanted to talk to you." Sophie hesitated. "Can it wait? Olivia is helping me pick colors for my school project." Goldie looked at the screen. Olivia smiled softly. "Hi, Goldie," she said, like she belonged in this moment more than Goldie did. That night, Goldie couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room alone, staring at family photos on the wall. Every picture felt like evidence from another life. Grant and her smiling at a wedding, Liam as a baby in her arms, Sophie laughing on her shoulder, a family that looked intact, a family that no longer existed in practice. Her phone buzzed. A message from Grant. "We need to talk tomorrow about adjustments at home." Adjustments. Always adjustments. Goldie stared at the message for a long time. Then she finally replied, "No more adjustments." She pressed send. And for the first time in months, she felt something rise in her chest that wasn't pain. It was clarity, because she finally understood she wasn't being pushed out of her family. She was being rewritten out of it, and she was done letting them hold the pen. By Friday evening, the house no longer felt like it belonged to Goldie Stephens. It still looked the same marble counters, same soft suburban lighting, same framed family photos lining the hallway, but something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. It was no longer a home, it was a system, and Olivia Carter had quietly become part of its operating structure. Grant had called it a simple dinner, but nothing about it felt simple to Goldie. Olivia arrived before him. Of course she did. She walked in carrying a small bottle of wine and a smile that suggested she had done this before, maybe not in this house, but in others where she had already learned how to belong without being invited. "I thought I'd help set up," Olivia said casually, placing the wine on the counter. Goldie stood in the kitchen doorway. "You weren't invited," she said calmly. Olivia didn't flinch. Grant said it was fine. That name again. Goldie turned slightly toward the hallway where Liam and Sophie were already laughing at something on Olivia's phone. So they had already accepted her presence, before Goldie even knew she was supposed to. Grant arrived 15 minutes later, loosening his tie as he walked in, like the house was a place he visited rather than lived in. His eyes briefly passed over Goldie, then immediately shifted to Olivia. "Good you made it," he said. Not to Goldie. To Olivia. That small detail landed harder than anything else that week. Goldie had cooked the meal, cleaned the house, prepared the table, but Olivia was the one being acknowledged. Dinner began like a performance everyone had already rehearsed except Goldie. Liam talked about school. Sophie showed drawings. Olivia responded to everything with perfect timing, laughing when needed, nodding, when appropriate offering helpful comments that made her seem more like a co-parent than a guest. Grant leaned back in his chair, watching Olivia instead of his wife. "She really understands the kids," he said casually. Goldie froze slightly. Olivia smiled modestly. "They're easy to understand when you listen closely." That word again. Listen. As if Goldie hadn't been listening for years. Grant turned to Goldie briefly, almost as an afterthought. "You should try that more," he said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was worse. It was instructional. Goldie placed her fork down slowly. "I listen to my children," she said evenly. Grant sighed. "Goldie? Don't turn this into a thing." "A thing," she repeated softly. Olivia interjected gently. "Maybe it's just different communication styles." Goldie looked at her, always neutral, always careful, always positioned exactly where she needed to be to avoid responsibility. Goldie nodded slowly. "Of course," she said, "different styles." A pause. Then she added quietly, "One of them just happens to replace me in my own home." The air shifted instantly. Liam looked up. Sophie stopped eating. Grant's expression tightened. "Enough," he said sharply. Goldie didn't move. Olivia placed her hand lightly on Grant's arm. "It's okay," she said softly. "I understand she's feeling insecure." That word again, insecure. As if Goldie's pain was a personality trait rather than a reaction. After dinner, Olivia began clearing plates. Goldie watched her move through the kitchen like she had memorized its layout. "You don't have to clean," Goldie said. Olivia smiled. "It's no problem. I actually enjoy it." Grant leaned against the counter, watching Olivia instead of intervening. "That's thoughtful of you," he said. Goldie laughed once under her breath. "You've become very comfortable here," she said. Olivia paused slightly. Then she replied carefully. "The kids asked me to stay more involved." Goldie turned toward Grant. "Did they?" she asked. Grant didn't hesitate. Yes. That simple answer felt rehearsed, or decided without her. Later that night, Goldie overheard something she wasn't meant to hear. She was walking past the hallway when she saw Grant and Olivia in the living room. The door was half open. Grant's voice was low. "She's still resisting," he said. Olivia sighed. "That's expected, but we need consistency. The children are adjusting faster when she's not involved in certain decisions." Goldie stopped walking. "She, not your wife, not Goldie, just she," Grant replied. "How long until it stabilizes?" Olivia hesitated. Then, soon. If we keep reinforcing the structure, she'll eventually accept her role. Goldie felt her stomach drop. Her role. In her own life. Grant nodded slowly. "Good. I don't want this affecting the kids." Olivia added softly. "It won't. They're already bonding with the new dynamic." New dynamic. Goldie stepped back quietly. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It wasn't emotional drift, it was coordination. The next morning, Ms. Reynolds called Goldie unexpectedly. "There's been a small update regarding school involvement," the teacher said politely. Goldie sat down. "What kind of update?" A pause. "Well, Olivia has been added as an authorized contact for both Liam and Sophie. She'll be assisting with school coordination going forward." Goldie closed her eyes briefly. "Authorized by who?" she asked quietly. Another pause. "Your husband." "Of course." That afternoon, Goldie went to the school early. She needed to see it for herself. And she did. Olivia was standing in the hallway near the classroom speaking with Ms. Reynolds while holding a folder labeled with both children's names, like it belonged to her. Liam ran past and hugged Olivia quickly before even noticing Goldie. Sophie followed, smiling brightly. "Olivia, can you come to my art presentation next week?" she asked. Olivia smiled. "Of course, sweetheart." Goldie stepped forward. "Actually," she said, voice calm but firm, "I'll be attending that." Sophie hesitated. Olivia turned slightly, her expression soft. "Oh, I didn't realize you were planning to," she said gently. "Grant mentioned he might be busy that day." Goldie looked at her. "You're not deciding my schedule," she said quietly. Olivia blinked once, then smiled again. "I would never." But she already had. That night, Grant came home late again. Goldie was waiting. Not angry, not emotional, just still. "I want to ask you something," she said. Grant loosened his tie. "I'm tired, Goldie. This won't take long." He sighed. "Go ahead." She looked at him carefully. "Am I still part of this family?" she asked. Silence, not immediate denial, not reassurance. Silence. Then Grant said, "Of course you are." But he didn't sound certain, and that was the answer. Later, after he went upstairs, Goldie stood alone in the kitchen. She looked around slowly. At the dinner table Olivia had helped set. At the fridge covered in schedules she didn't create. At the life that was still technically hers, but no longer emotionally included her. Her phone buzzed. A message from Liam, "Mom, Olivia said she might come to my game instead of you because Dad thinks you'll be stressed." Goldie stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, "I will be there." She didn't ask. She didn't explain. She didn't wait for approval. Because something inside her had finally stopped asking permission to exist. And upstairs in the quiet glow of the bedroom light, Grant was already speaking to Olivia again on the phone. Not about feelings, not about marriage, about strategy, about timing, about control. And Goldie Stephens, standing alone in the kitchen below, finally understood the truth. She wasn't losing her family slowly. She was being systematically erased from it, and the next step would determine whether she disappeared completely. Goldie Stephens didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Grant in the darkness, staring at the ceiling while the man next to her breathed like nothing in their world had changed. Every few minutes, his phone lit up silently on the nightstand, messages she didn't need to see to know who they were from. Olivia Carter. It always came back to that name. At some point near dawn, Grant rolled away from her, not unkindly, not dramatically, just instinctively, as if even in sleep his body had already chosen distance. By morning, Goldie understood something she couldn't unsee anymore. She was no longer being replaced emotionally. She was being replaced functionally, piece by piece, task by task, role by role. At breakfast, Liam sat scrolling through his tablet while Sophie colored at the table. Grant stood by the counter answering emails. The house was moving around Goldie, not with her. Then Sophie looked up. "Olivia said she's picking me up from school today," she said casually. Goldie paused. "No, I am." Sophie tilted her head. Dad already told her yes. Goldie turned toward Grant. He didn't even look up from his phone. "It was easier," he said, those 3 words again. It was easier. Goldie felt something tighten in her chest. Easier for who, she asked quietly. Grant finally looked at her impatient. "Goldie, we don't need to turn every decision into a debate. I'm their mother," she said. Grant sighed. "And you're still their mother. That hasn't changed." But it had, and they both knew it. That afternoon, Goldie came home earlier than expected. The house was unusually calm, too calm. From the kitchen she heard laughter, a soft, familiar laugh that didn't belong there. Olivia Carter was inside again, wearing casual clothes this time. Not an outsider anymore, not even a guest. She was arranging groceries on the counter like she had done it 100 times before. Grant stood nearby, leaning against the island, watching her. "Thanks for handling this," he said. Olivia smiled. "It's easier when things are organized." Goldie stopped in the doorway. No one reacted immediately. That was the worst part. No surprise, no tension, just acceptance of her absence. Finally, Olivia turned. "Oh, hi, Goldie," she said warmly. "I wasn't expecting you home so early." Goldie looked at her silently, then at Grant. "You gave her the house code?" she asked. Grant exhaled like this was inconvenient. "It's just practical," he said. "She helps with the kids sometimes." Goldie stepped further into the kitchen. "Sometimes," she repeated slowly. Olivia placed a carton of milk into the fridge. "I don't want to overstep," she said gently. "I'm just trying to help while you're adjusting." Goldie laughed once, a dry, humorless sound. "Adjusting," she repeated. "That word is starting to sound like an eviction notice." Grant's tone sharpened. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Goldie asked. Silence. Olivia stepped slightly back, playing her role perfectly, neutral, soft, non-threatening. But she didn't leave. She never left. Later that evening, Goldie found Olivia in Sophie's room. They were sitting on the floor together, building something out of colored blocks. Sophie was laughing freely, a sound Goldie used to be the source of. Olivia looked up. "Oh, we're just finishing a school project," she said lightly. Goldie crossed her arms. "You're spending a lot of time alone with my children." Olivia tilted her head. "They like me." That sentence wasn't defensive, it was factual, and that made it worse. Goldie knelt slightly so she was eye level with Sophie. "Sweetheart, can I help you instead?" she asked softly. Sophie hesitated. A pause too long for a child. "Then Olivia already knows how I want it." Goldie froze. "You already decided?" Sophie nodded. "She helped me plan it yesterday." Goldie turned her head slightly. Olivia smiled gently. "She's very creative." Goldie stood back up slowly, and in that moment, something inside her stopped resisting, not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because she finally understood the pattern. That night, Grant came home late again. Goldie was waiting in the living room, not sitting, standing, still. Grant loosened his tie. "What is it now?" She didn't react to the tone. She had stopped reacting. "I want to understand something," she said. He sighed. "Goldie, no," she interrupted calmly. "You've explained enough. I just want clarity." That made him pause. She continued. "Olivia handles school. Olivia handles the kids' schedules. Olivia is trusted with pickups. Olivia is involved in their decisions. Olivia is in your conversations more than I am." Grant's jaw tightened. "That's not—" Goldie raised her hand slightly. "Let me finish." He stopped. She took a breath. "Tell me where I fit now." The question hung in the air, not dramatic, not emotional, just precise. Grant looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time he didn't immediately respond. That silence said more than anything he could have said. Finally he spoke. "You're still their mother." Goldie nodded slowly. "I heard that part." Another pause. Then quietly, "But that wasn't my question." The next morning something changed, not externally, internally. Goldie stopped asking. She stopped waiting. She stopped trying to insert herself into spaces that were already filled. At breakfast, when Sophie asked Olivia to help with her outfit choice, Goldie didn't interrupt. When Liam asked Olivia for advice on his science project, Goldie didn't step in. When Grant confirmed Olivia would take them to school, Goldie didn't argue. She simply watched and recorded everything in silence. Later that day, Goldie met with Daniel Brooks, a quiet office downtown. Neutral walls, neutral lighting. A place where emotions didn't matter, only facts did. Daniel reviewed her notes carefully. "This is more than emotional distance," he said slowly. This looks structured. Goldie nodded. It is. He looked up at her. You understand what this means legally, I'm starting to, she replied. Daniel leaned back slightly. If he's positioning Olivia as a consistent caregiver, it could affect custody perception. Goldie didn't blink. I want documentation, she said. No hesitation, no emotion, just clarity. Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. We begin carefully. That evening, Goldie stood outside Sophie's school event. She saw Grant arrive first, then Olivia, then the children running toward Olivia before even noticing her. It used to hurt differently. Now it just confirmed something she already knew. This wasn't accidental anymore. It was established. A system, a replacement pattern, a quiet rewriting of her identity in real time. As she watched from a distance, Liam turned briefly. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in his expression. Confusion, recognition, maybe even guilt. But Olivia placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding his attention away again. And just like that, he turned back. Goldie didn't move. She didn't call out. She didn't interrupt. She simply stood there, finally understanding the truth fully. She wasn't losing her family because she was unloved. She was losing it because someone else had already been placed in her position, carefully, systematically. And now she had to decide whether she would fight to be seen again or rebuild a life where she was never invisible in the first place. Goldie Stephens didn't plan the confrontation. It built itself inside her over days of silence, over meals she wasn't part of, over decisions made about her children without her voice in the room. By the time she finally spoke, it wasn't emotion that pushed her forward. It was exhaustion, the kind that comes when fighting stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like humiliation. That evening, Grant was in the kitchen when she walked in. Olivia Carter wasn't there, for once. Just him. Goldie stopped a few feet away. We need to talk, she said. Grant didn't look up from his phone. I'm busy. This won't take long. That made him sigh. He set the phone down, finally acknowledging her presence. Go ahead. Goldie held his gaze. Do you realize Olivia is replacing me in this family a beat? Grant blinked once, then exhaled like she had just repeated an old argument. Goldie, we've talked about this. No, she said firmly. You've dismissed it. That's not the same thing. He rubbed his forehead. You're creating a narrative that doesn't exist. Goldie laughed once. Quiet, sharp. There are school forms with her name on them. My daughter asks her for advice before me. My son calls her before I even know what's happening in his life. Tell me again how that narrative doesn't exist. Grant's jaw tightened. This is what I mean, he said. You turn every normal adjustment into emotional chaos. Normal, Goldie repeated. Replacing a mother is normal now. Grant stood up slightly. No one is replacing you. Goldie stepped closer. Then why does it feel like I'm already gone? Silence, not denial, not reassurance. Silence. That silence said everything. A voice interrupted from the hallway, soft, controlled. Olivia, I didn't mean to interrupt, she said gently, stepping into view. Of course she did. Goldie turned slowly. Olivia smiled politely as always, positioned exactly between conflict and innocence. I think this might be a misunderstanding, Olivia said. Goldie didn't blink. It isn't. Olivia tilted her head slightly. I care about the children. That's all. That's not all, Goldie replied. Grant stepped in quickly. Goldie, enough. That word again. Enough. As if her awareness had a limit, as if her reality had an expiration point. Olivia raised her hand slightly in a calming gesture. I don't want tension, she said softly. Maybe I should give you two space. She moved toward the hallway, But before she left, she added, I think Goldie just feels insecure about change. That word again, insecure. Goldie turned sharply. I am not insecure, she said quietly. Olivia paused, smiled faintly. I didn't mean it negatively, but it didn't matter because the damage wasn't in the word. It was in how easily Grant accepted it. Grant sighed again, frustrated. Goldie. This is exactly why things have shifted, he said. You react emotionally to everything Olivia does. Goldie stared at him. Everything Olivia does, she repeated. Yes, he said, because she's trying to help and you're pushing her away. Goldie felt something inside her go still, not anger, not sadness, something colder, more final. I'm pushing her away, she repeated slowly. From my children. Grant rubbed his temples. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Goldie nodded once. I see. The conversation ended there, not because it was resolved, but because Grant walked away. Again. Later that night, Goldie stood in Liam's doorway. He was packing his school bag. Did Olivia help you today? She asked softly. Liam didn't look up. Yeah, she explained my project better. Goldie nodded slowly. And did you ask me? A pause, longer this time. Then Liam said, Dad said you were busy. Goldie blinked. I wasn't busy. Liam shrugged. I just thought Olivia would know faster. That sentence didn't sound cruel. That was the worst part. It sounded natural. Sophie was next. She was in her room FaceTiming Olivia again. Goldie knocked gently. Sophie turned. Hi, Mom, but didn't pause the call. Goldie stepped in slowly. Sweetheart, can I talk to you for a minute? Sophie hesitated. Olivia's voice came through the speaker. Everything okay? Sophie nodded quickly. Yeah, just Mom. That word just landed softly but deeply, like Goldie was an interruption, not a priority. That night, Goldie couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room alone. The house was quiet, but not peaceful. There was always the sense that someone else's version of her life was happening just one room away. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Brooks. We need to move carefully. I've reviewed the situation. There is growing documentation supporting Olivia's established caregiver role. Goldie stared at the screen. Established caregiver. Not temporary. Not substitute. Established. She closed her eyes. So it had already become official without ever being spoken. The next morning, Goldie went to school earlier than usual. She needed to see it again, to confirm what she already knew. And there it was. Olivia standing near the classroom entrance holding a folder labeled with both children's names. Ms. Reynolds speaking to her like she was part of the system. Liam walking past Goldie without stopping. Sophie running straight into Olivia's arms. No hesitation, no confusion, no question. Goldie stood still, watching, not crying, not reacting, just absorbing the reality. When Grant arrived, he didn't even notice her at first. He was already talking to Olivia. Then he glanced at Goldie, briefly, like an update he hadn't reviewed yet. We're on track, he said to Olivia. Olivia smiled. Good. The children are adapting well. Goldie stepped forward slightly, adapting to what she asked. Grant finally looked at her. Goldie? He warned. But she continued, adapting to a version of their life where I don't matter. Silence. Olivia answered gently. That's not what this is. Goldie turned toward her. Then explain it. Olivia hesitated. Just for a second. Then smiled again. I think you're struggling to accept change. Grant nodded slightly as if agreeing. And that was when Goldie understood something important. She wasn't being debated anymore. She was being categorized. That evening, Goldie met Daniel again. This time she brought everything. Messages, schedules, screenshots, notes. Daniel reviewed them slowly. This is consistent, he said. They are building a narrative of stability around Olivia. Goldie nodded. And me, Daniel looked at her carefully. You're being positioned as instability. Silence. Then he added, if this continues, custody arguments will not be emotional. They will be structural. Goldie exhaled slowly. So I stop reacting, she said. Daniel nodded. And start documenting everything. Goldie stood up, not shaken, not broken. Clear. I'm done reacting, she said quietly. And for the first time since Olivia Carter entered her life, Goldie Stephens wasn't trying to be understood anymore. She was preparing to be undeniable. By the time Goldie Stephens stopped trying to fight for space in her own home, something unexpected began to happen. Not peace, not reconciliation, but selection. Quiet, gradual, irreversible selection. The children were choosing sides, and no one had officially told them to. It started with small things. Liam stopped asking Goldie for help with homework. Sophie stopped running to her when she got home from school. Grant stopped including her in decisions without even noticing he was doing it. And Olivia Carter started filling every silence Goldie used to occupy. One afternoon, Goldie stood in the kitchen while Liam walked in, dropping his backpack on the floor. Can you help me with my science project? Goldie asked gently. Liam paused, not annoyed, not rude, just unsure. Olivia already explained it, he said. Goldie blinked. When yesterday, he replied, she helped me plan the whole thing. Goldie nodded slowly. And you didn't think to ask me? Liam shrugged. Dad said you've been stressed lately. That word again. Stressed. A softer version of incapable. Goldie turned away before he could see her expression change. I see, she said quietly. Sophie was different, more emotional, more open, more vulnerable to influence, and Olivia had learned exactly how to speak to that vulnerability. Goldie found Sophie one evening sitting on the couch laughing at something on Olivia's phone during a video call. Goldie stood in the doorway. What are you doing? She asked softly. Sophie looked up. Olivia is helping me pick outfits for the school presentation. Goldie stepped forward. I can help you with that. Sophie hesitated, then shook her head lightly. It's okay. Olivia already knows what looks good on me. That sentence didn't sound cruel. It sounded rehearsed, like it had been repeated enough times to become truth. That night, Goldie sat at the dining table alone. Grant was still at work. The children were upstairs. And Olivia's influence felt louder than any voice in the house. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel Brooks. We need to discuss urgency. The children's behavioral alignment with Olivia is accelerating faster than expected. Goldie stared at the message. Behavioral alignment, not affection, not preference. Alignment, like a system being calibrated. The next morning, everything shifted further. Goldie walked into the kitchen and found Olivia already there, making breakfast. Again, like she had moved in without ever packing a bag. Liam sat at the counter eating. Sophie was drawing beside Olivia. Grant was reading emails. And Goldie was simply standing in the doorway unnoticed for a full 10 seconds, until Olivia finally looked up. Oh, good morning, she said warmly, like Goldie was a guest arriving late, not the owner of the house. Goldie walked in slowly. I didn't know you were here, she said calmly. Olivia smiled. Grant asked me to help with the morning routine. Things have been a bit hectic. Goldie turned to Grant. You asked her. Grant didn't look up. It makes mornings easier. That phrase again. Easier. The universal justification for erasure. At school drop-off that day, something happened that Goldie couldn't ignore anymore. Liam ran straight to Grant. Sophie ran straight to Olivia. Neither of them hesitated. Neither of them looked back. Goldie stood still behind them, watching, unseen, unchosen. And then Sophie turned around suddenly. Mum, she called. Goldie lifted her head. For a second, just a second, hope flickered, but Sophie wasn't calling her. She was asking, "Can Olivia come to my school project day instead of you?" The question wasn't loud, it wasn't aggressive, it was worse, it was natural. Goldie felt her breath catch. "I'll be there," she said firmly. Sophie tilted her head, but Olivia already said she might come. Goldie turned toward Olivia. Olivia smiled softly. "I didn't want to assume anything." But she already had. That evening, Goldie confronted Grant again. This time, she didn't wait for politeness. She stood in front of him as he entered the house. "We need to talk about the children," she said. Grant sighed. "Not again." "Yes, again," she replied. "They are starting to replace me emotionally." Grant set his keys down. "No one is replacing you." Goldie stepped closer. "Then why do I feel like a visitor in my own children's lives?" Silence. Then Grant said more firmly, "You're making this worse by reacting like this." Goldie froze. "That's your answer?" she asked quietly. "You need to stabilize," he added. That word again, stabilize, as if she were a problem in the system, not a person inside it. Olivia appeared in this hallway again. Perfect timing, perfect presence, always arriving exactly when tension peaked. "I don't want to interfere," she said softly, but she never stayed away. Goldie turned slowly. "You already are interfering," she said. Olivia blinked. "That's not my intention." Grant stepped in. "Goldie, stop attacking her." That sentence hit differently, not because it was loud, but because it was automatic, defensive, immediate, without thought, as if Olivia needed protection. And Goldie didn't. That night, something changed in Liam. Goldie went to his room. He was packing his bag. "Are you going somewhere?" she asked. "No," he said. "Olivia is picking me up early tomorrow for a school event." Goldie frowned. "I already told you I was taking you." Liam paused. "Dad changed it," he said. Goldie exhaled slowly. "I wasn't informed." Liam shrugged. "It's easier this way." Goldie looked at him. Not angry, not emotional, just searching. "For who?" she asked quietly. Liam didn't answer. Because he didn't know, or because he didn't think he had to. Sophie was easier to read, but harder to reclaim. Goldie found her in her room later talking to Olivia on video call again. Sophie was smiling, relaxed, comfortable. Goldie knocked softly. Sophie turned. "Hi, Mum," but didn't end the call. Goldie stepped inside. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "can I talk to you for a moment?" Sophie hesitated. Olivia's voice came through the phone. "Everything okay?" Sophie nodded quickly. "Yeah, it's just Mum." Just that word again. Goldie looked at the screen. Olivia smiled politely. "I don't want to interrupt," she said, but she never hung up first. That night, Goldie sat alone in the living room. The house was quiet again, but not empty. It never felt empty anymore. It felt occupied, emotionally, by conversations she wasn't part of, by decisions made without her, by relationships she had been slowly replaced from. Her phone buzzed. Daniel Brooks again. "We need to formalize documentation of the children's current attachment patterns. This is becoming critical." Goldie stared at the screen. Attachment patterns. Not family bonds, not love. Patterns, system language, legal language, cold language, truthful language. Goldie finally stood up. She walked to the window. Outside, the suburban street looked peaceful, perfect, normal, and completely disconnected from what was happening inside her life. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was losing her family. She felt like she was being systematically rewritten out of it. And the worst part, everyone else had already accepted the new version, except her. Goldie whispered into the silence, "I won't fight to be included in a version of this family that erases me." And for the first time, she meant it. By the time Goldie Stephens stopped arguing, she started noticing something far more dangerous than rejection: indifference. Not the loud kind, not the obvious kind, but the quiet, structural kind that doesn't announce itself. It simply removes you from the equation until your presence no longer changes outcomes. And that was exactly what was happening inside her own home. That morning, Goldie woke up to an empty side of the bed. Grant had already left. Again, no note, no message, no acknowledgement. Just absence treated as routine. Downstairs, the house was already in motion without her. Liam was eating breakfast while scrolling on his tablet. Sophie was laughing softly at something on Olivia Carter's phone. And Olivia, calm, composed, perfectly placed, was making coffee like she had always belonged there. Goldie stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, watching, not interrupting, not reacting, just observing a life that continued seamlessly without her involvement. "Good morning," Olivia said, gently noticing her. Goldie nodded once. "Morning," Grant's voice came from the kitchen doorway, already half distracted. "You're up late," he said. Goldie looked at him. "I was here the whole time." He didn't respond to that. Instead, he turned to Olivia. "Did you send the school email?" "Yes," Olivia replied. "Already handled." Goldie felt something small tighten in her chest. Already handled. Without her, again. At breakfast, Liam pushed his plate away. "I'm going to be late," he said. Olivia smiled. "I can drive you." Goldie spoke immediately. "I'll take him." Silence. 3 pairs of eyes briefly shifted toward her. Not hostility, not agreement, just evaluation. Grant sighed. Olivia already offered. "I'm his mother," Goldie said firmly. That sentence used to mean something automatic. Now it sounded like a request. Liam hesitated, then quietly said, "It's faster if Olivia takes me." That was it. No anger, no defiance, just preference. And preference was becoming more powerful than authority. Goldie stepped back. "Fine," she said softly. And for the first time, she didn't argue after that. She just watched them leave. Later that day, everything inside her began to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but in slow internal collapses that no one else could see. It started with memories. The way Liam used to run into her arms after school, the way Sophie used to fall asleep on her shoulder, the way Grant used to look at her like she was part of the foundation of his life, not an accessory inside it. Now all of it felt like a different timeline, a version of reality that had been quietly edited out. That afternoon, Goldie went to the kitchen and found an envelope on the counter, her name on it. No explanation, no context. Inside were printed schedules, school pickups, doctor appointments, extracurricular activities, all assigned, none including her. Her hand trembled slightly as she flipped through the pages. Olivia Carter's name appeared repeatedly. Grant's signature at the bottom. Formal, final, operational. Like she was reading a system update that didn't require her approval. She didn't cry. Not immediately. That came later. Much later. That evening, Goldie sat alone in Sophie's room while the child slept. She watched her daughter's face in the soft light, peaceful, unaware, still innocent enough to believe that every adult decision around her was simply for convenience. Goldie whispered quietly, "I used to be your safe place." Her voice didn't break. It didn't need to, because something deeper already had. Downstairs, Grant and Olivia were talking in the kitchen. Goldie didn't intend to listen, but the house had stopped respecting privacy boundaries a long time ago. "We need consistency," Olivia was saying calmly. Grant exhaled. "She's still resisting." "That's expected," Olivia replied. "But the children are stabilizing faster when there's less emotional interference." Goldie froze outside the hallway. emotional interference. That was her now, a disruption, not a person, Grant asked quietly. How long until this settles? Olivia paused. Then soon. If we maintain structure, she'll naturally disengage. Goldie's hand slowly tightened against the wall. Naturally disengage. Like she was a malfunctioning system component being phased out. Not a mother, not a wife, a variable being removed. The next morning, something inside Goldie stopped reacting the way it used to. Sophie asked Olivia to help pick her outfit. Goldie didn't intervene. Liam asked Olivia to review his school project. Goldie didn't correct him. Grant changed pickup arrangements again. Goldie didn't protest, not because she agreed, but because she was beginning to understand something deeper. Her resistance was now being used as evidence against her. Every emotional reaction became instability. Every correction became conflict. Every attempt to participate became interference, so she stopped feeding the system what it needed to label her. That afternoon, Goldie met Daniel Brooks again. His office was quieter this time, more serious. He reviewed the updated documentation slowly. "This is accelerating," he said. Goldie nodded. "I know." Daniel looked up. "Goldie, you're being strategically displaced from daily parenting involvement." She didn't flinch. "I've noticed," he continued carefully, "if this continues, it will affect custody arguments significantly. The court doesn't evaluate intent, it evaluates presence." Goldie exhaled slowly. "Then I need proof of presence," she said. Daniel nodded. "And absence." Goldie looked at him. "Already collecting it." That was the moment Daniel realized something had shifted. She wasn't collapsing anymore. She was organizing. That night, Goldie returned home late. The house was unusually calm. Too calm. Laughter came from the kitchen, Olivia's voice, Grant's voice, the children's voices. A family rhythm that didn't require her participation to function. She stood in the doorway, watching them, not stepping in, not interrupting, just observing what her life had become without her consent. Liam noticed her first. He paused, for half a second, then turned back to Olivia. That pause used to mean something, inmoying. Now it meant nothing. Sophie looked up briefly. "Hi, Mum," she said, then returned to her conversation. Goldie stood there a moment longer, then quietly turned away. And in that moment, something inside her finally stopped breaking. Because it had already broken completely, now there was only clarity left. Upstairs, Grant's voice echoed faintly. "We're almost there," Olivia replied softly. "Yes, stability is close." Goldie stopped at the bottom of the stairs. Not crying, not shaking, just still. And for the first time since Olivia Carter entered their lives, Goldie Stephens understood the truth with absolute clarity. She was not losing her family. She was being rewritten out of it with surgical precision. And now that she could finally see the structure behind the betrayal, she was done being part of it. The moment Goldie Stephens stopped hoping things would improve, she started seeing everything more clearly. Pain had blurred her vision for months. Clarity sharpened it overnight. And once she finally looked closely enough, the betrayal was everywhere. The house was quiet when Goldie entered Grant's office. He rarely locked it anymore. He didn't think he needed to, not because he trusted her, because he believed she was too emotionally exhausted to act. That assumption would become his biggest mistake. Goldie closed the office door softly behind her. The room smelled like expensive cologne black coffee and cold ambition. Grant's world, minimalist shelves, corporate awards, framed photos of networking events where Olivia Carter appeared more often in recent months than Goldie herself. That realization alone made her stomach tighten, but she kept moving. Systematically, carefully, emotion without strategy had already cost her too much. She opened the top drawer first. Nothing unusual. Pens, contracts, expense reports. The second drawer was different. A slim black folder, no label. Goldie pulled it out slowly. Inside were printed financial statements. Her heartbeat slowed not from fear, but from focus. Account transfers, property adjustments, asset reallocations. Large amounts moved quietly over the last 6 months, without discussion, without disclosure, without her. Goldie flipped another page and froze. Emergency contact Olivia Carter. Not Goldie Stephens. Not his wife of 15 years. Olivia. Her fingers tightened against the paper. It wasn't just emotional anymore. It wasn't just personal. It was administrative, legal, structural. Grant wasn't drifting away from his marriage. He was reorganizing his life around another woman. Goldie sat down slowly in Grant's chair. For a long moment, she simply stared at the documents spread across the desk. Every page felt less like evidence of cheating and more like evidence of replacement. Because affairs were messy, impulsive, emotional, this wasn't impulsive, this was planned. Her eyes moved toward another document. Custody consultation notes. Goldie's breath caught slightly. She picked up the paper carefully. Several sections were highlighted. Mother demonstrates emotional volatility. Children show increased comfort with secondary caregiver. Consistency and structure currently reinforced by father's support system. Support system. Olivia. Always Olivia. Goldie's chest tightened, not from heartbreak this time, but from realization. They weren't waiting to push her out anymore. They were preparing for life after she was gone. A sound in the hallway startled her. Goldie quickly placed the documents back exactly as she found them. Footsteps passed, then faded. She exhaled slowly. The old version of herself would have cried, would have confronted Grant immediately, would have demanded explanations. But the woman standing in that office now understood something important. Explanations were useless when the betrayal was already operational. That evening, Goldie sat at the dinner table quietly while Grant scrolled through emails. Liam talked about school. Sophie talked about an art competition Olivia had helped her enter. Goldie listened carefully. Every sentence now sounded different. Every interaction carried hidden structure underneath it. Olivia wasn't casually involved. She had been integrated. Grant finally looked up. "You're quiet tonight." Goldie smiled faintly. "Tired?" He nodded immediately, accepting the answer. Because he no longer looked deeply enough to notice the difference between exhaustion and transformation. Halfway through dinner, Liam said casually, "Olivia is coming to my soccer game Saturday." Goldie lifted her eyes slowly. "Is she?" Grant answered before Liam could. "She's been helping with his training schedule." Goldie nodded once. No reaction, no confrontation. Grant seemed relieved by that, which confirmed another truth: they had grown dependent on her emotional reactions. Without them, they felt unbalanced. Good. Later that night, Goldie sat in her car outside Daniel Brooks's office. The city lights reflected against the windshield while the folder rested heavily in her lap. Daniel reviewed every page carefully. The longer he stayed silent, the colder Goldie felt. Finally, he looked up. "This is significant." Goldie nodded. "He's preparing." Daniel leaned back slightly. "Yes," he said carefully, "and he's been preparing for a while." That part hurt more than she expected. Not because Grant betrayed her, but because he had planned the betrayal while pretending normalcy at home. Family dinners, school events, shared holidays, all while quietly designing her removal. Daniel continued flipping through the documents. "These transfers suggest pre-divorce positioning," he explained. "He's protecting assets before formal separation." Goldie crossed her arms. And the custody notes, Daniel's expression darkened slightly. That concerns me more. He tapped the highlighted section. They're building a narrative. Goldie looked at him steadily. I already know. Daniel studied her carefully. You're calmer than I expected. Goldie looked down at the papers. I already finished grieving, she said softly. That wasn't entirely true, but it was close. When she returned home, the lights downstairs were dim. Grant was asleep on the couch, television still glowing faintly across his face. For a moment, Goldie simply stood there, looking at the man she used to love so deeply that she built her entire adult life around him. Now he looked unfamiliar, not because he changed overnight, but because she had finally stopped seeing him through loyalty. And once loyalty disappeared, the manipulation became impossible to ignore. His phone buzzed softly on the coffee table. A message preview lit the screen. Olivia. We're close. She's emotionally detaching faster now. Goldie stared at the words, not heartbreak, not romance, strategy, assessment, observation, like she was a project being monitored. Goldie slowly picked up the phone. Another message appeared seconds later. Olivia, once the children fully stabilize, everything else will follow naturally. Children fully stabilize. Goldie's stomach turned cold, not because she was surprised anymore, because she finally understood the scale of it. This wasn't just about Grant wanting another woman. This was about replacing the emotional center of the family itself, and Olivia believed she was succeeding. Goldie gently placed the phone back down exactly where it had been. Then she walked upstairs quietly. No tears, no screaming, no collapse, only silence. Focused silence. Inside her bedroom, Goldie stood in front of the mirror for a long time. She barely recognized herself anymore, not because she looked weak, because she looked awake. For months, she had kept asking the wrong question, why is this happening to me? Now she finally understood the real question, why did they think I would never notice? And suddenly, everything shifted. Goldie reached for her phone, opened a new note, and began writing. Dates, conversations, school changes, financial movements, custody positioning, patterns, everything. Not emotionally, strategically. Because for the first time since Olivia Carter entered their lives, Goldie Stephens stopped trying to save her marriage and started preparing to survive the war hidden underneath it. The strange thing about betrayal, Goldie Stephens realized, was that eventually it stopped hurting in the same way. At first, it felt like drowning. Then it felt like bleeding. But after enough humiliation, it became clarity. Cold, sharp, unavoidable clarity. And clarity was dangerous, because once a woman finally saw the truth without love distorting it, she stopped being controllable. The next morning, Goldie woke before sunrise. For months, mornings had begun with anxiety. Today began with purpose. She sat at the kitchen table alone while the rest of the house slept. Her laptop was open. Legal notes covered the table beside untouched coffee. Dates, transfers, school records, messages, patterns. The emotional chaos Grant and Olivia had created finally looked different when organized into evidence. It no longer resembled confusion, it resembled strategy. Goldie heard footsteps upstairs. Grant entered the kitchen, still half awake, loosening the sleeves of his dress shirt. He stopped when he saw the papers. "What's all this?" he asked. Goldie calmly closed the folder, just organizing things. Grant studied her face for a moment. Something about her had changed. She wasn't crying anymore, wasn't reacting, wasn't asking questions. And somehow, that unsettled him more. "You've been distant lately," he said cautiously. Goldie almost laughed at the irony. Distant, after months of being erased from her own life. but she only nodded slightly. Maybe I'm adjusting. That word, his word. Grant looked uncomfortable hearing it from her. Good. Later that morning, Goldie met Daniel Brooks again. This time, she didn't arrive broken. She arrived prepared. Daniel reviewed the updated documentation while Goldie sat across from him with unsettling calm. Finally, he placed the folder down carefully. I need to ask you something directly, he said. Goldie nodded. Did Grant ever discuss separation formally with you? No. Daniel frowned slightly. That matters. Goldie leaned back slowly. He planned everything before I even realized my marriage was collapsing. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. He's preparing a custody argument against you. The room became completely silent. Goldie didn't blink, didn't gasp, didn't fall apart, because somewhere deep down, she had already known. Daniel continued carefully. The emotional instability narrative, reduced parental involvement, Olivia's integration into the children's routines, it's coordinated. Goldie stared at the table, not devastated, awakened, because suddenly every confusing moment made sense. Every dismissal, every "you're too emotional," every time Grant intentionally provoked reactions, every time Olivia played calm while Goldie was pushed toward breakdown. They weren't just surviving conflict, they were documenting it. Goldie finally looked up. So, they needed me unstable. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. The truth landed harder than any betrayal before it. Not because Grant wanted another woman, but because he needed Goldie weakened in order to replace her cleanly. Daniel leaned forward. You need to understand something clearly, he said. Your reactions from this point forward matter legally. Goldie nodded once. No more reactions, she said quietly. Daniel studied her carefully. Can you do that? Goldie's eyes hardened for the first time in months. I can do more than that. When she returned home, Olivia was there again. Of course she was. This time, helping Sophie with homework while Grant answered emails nearby. The picture looked painfully domestic, almost intentional, like a preview of the family Goldie was being removed from. Olivia smiled when she saw her. Hi, Goldie. Goldie nodded politely. Olivia. No tension, no visible anger. That immediately changed the energy in the room. Grant looked up slowly, confused, almost cautious, because they had become used to emotional resistance, and without it, they didn't know where they stood. Sophie looked excited. Mom, Olivia helped me get an A on my spelling quiz. Goldie smiled softly at her daughter. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Grant glanced at her sharply, like he was waiting for sarcasm, for resentment, for instability. But Goldie simply walked to the kitchen calmly, and that unsettled him more than any argument ever had. That evening, Grant followed her into the bedroom. You're acting strange, he said. Goldie folded laundry quietly. Am I? Yes. She looked up calmly. How Grant hesitated because he couldn't say the truth out loud. You stopped reacting the way we expected. Instead, he said, You've become detached. Goldie nodded slowly. Maybe I finally realized something. Grant crossed his arms. What? She looked directly at him. You stopped being my husband a long time ago. Silence. Not defensive silence. Caught silence. Grant looked away first. For the first time since Olivia entered their lives, Goldie saw fear flicker across his face. Small, brief, but real. Not fear of losing her emotionally, fear of losing control of the narrative. That night, Goldie sat alone in her car outside a grocery store parking lot long after sunset. Not because she needed groceries, because she needed silence. Real silence, not the manipulated calm inside her house. She stared through the windshield while memories played in fragments. Giving up her marketing career after Liam was born because Grant's career needed flexibility, moving cities for his promotions, missing family events because she prioritized his networking dinners, defending him to friends who warned her she was disappearing into his life. And suddenly Goldie realized something devastating. She had spent 15 years building Grant's world while slowly abandoning her own. Her phone buzzed, a message from Sophie. "Olivia says she might take me shopping this weekend?" Goldie stared at the smiling emoji. Months ago, that message would have destroyed her. Tonight, it clarified something. The children weren't betraying her. They were adapting to the structure the adults around them created. And if she wanted to save them, she needed to stop collapsing emotionally and start becoming solid again. Goldie drove home slowly. When she entered the house, Grant and Olivia were in the kitchen talking quietly. They stopped when they saw her. That alone told her enough. Before they hid things emotionally, now they hid them strategically. Grant cleared his throat. "We were discussing Liam's school transfer options." Goldie placed her keys down calmly. "And why wasn't I included?" Olivia answered softly. "We didn't want to overwhelm you." Goldie smiled faintly. "Not wounded, not angry, just aware." "That excuse won't work much longer," she said quietly. Grant stiffened slightly. Olivia's smile faltered for the first time, only slightly, but Goldie noticed. That night, Goldie opened her laptop again. This time, she didn't write notes. She made plans. Financial reconstruction, custody strategy, housing options, personal accounts, career contacts she hadn't spoken to in years. Every click felt like oxygen returning to a drowning woman, and somewhere between spreadsheets and legal documents, Goldie Stephens felt something return to her that Grant and Olivia had spent months trying to erase. Not confidence, not happiness, identity. For the first time in a very long time, she stopped asking herself how to save her marriage and started asking a far more powerful question. Who could I become once I stopped begging people to see my worth? Downstairs, Grant laughed softly at something Olivia said. The sound no longer shattered Goldie, because she finally understood something neither of them realized yet. They thought they were watching her fall apart, but what they were really witnessing was her waking up. The most dangerous thing about Goldie Stephens' transformation was how quiet it became. No screaming, no emotional confrontations, no desperate attempts to be chosen anymore. And because of that, Grant Stephens started losing his ability to predict her. That unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. The house still moved around Olivia Carter as if she belonged there. She still arrived early, still helped Sophie with school projects, still attended Liam's practices, still stood in Goldie's kitchen making coffee like she had inherited the space emotionally before anything became official legally. But something had changed. Goldie no longer reacted. And without her reactions, Olivia's role suddenly looked strange, more visible, more invasive, more intentional. That Monday morning, Goldie sat quietly at the kitchen table, reviewing emails on her laptop. Grant walked in, adjusting his cufflinks. Olivia was beside the stove making breakfast. Liam and Sophie were laughing softly at something on Olivia's phone. The image was almost theatrical now, like everyone had memorized their positions. Grant glanced at Goldie. "You're up early." Goldie didn't look up. "I have work to do." That caught his attention immediately. "Work?" Goldie nodded calmly. "I've been reconnecting with old clients." A pause. Grant blinked. "I thought you stopped freelancing years ago." "I did," she replied evenly. "I'm starting again." Olivia's movement slowed slightly at the stove. Subtle, but noticeable. "Good." Grant sat down slowly. "That seems sudden." Goldie finally looked at him. "So was replacing me." Silence. Not explosive. Worse. controlled. Grant's jaw tightened. Olivia quickly stepped in with practiced softness. I don't think anyone is trying to replace you, Goldie smiled faintly. And I don't think you believe that anymore either. For the first time since Olivia entered their lives, Olivia didn't immediately answer. Later that afternoon, Goldie sat in her car outside Liam's soccer practice, not because anyone invited her, because she refused to disappear quietly anymore. From a distance, she watched Liam laugh with teammates while Grant stood beside Olivia near the field fence. The image looked polished, stable, exactly the kind of healthy transition narrative they had been building. Then Liam glanced toward the parking lot and saw her. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Not guilt, not rejection, confusion, because Goldie's absence had become normalized so gradually that her presence now felt unexpected. Goldie stepped out of the car calmly. No emotional scene, no confrontation, just presence. Grant immediately noticed her approaching. His shoulders stiffened slightly. You didn't say you were coming. Goldie nodded. I'm his mother. I don't need permission. Olivia looked away briefly. Grant forced a tight smile. No one said you did, but everyone had implied it for months. Liam walked over carefully. Mom Goldie smiled softly. I wanted to watch your practice. Liam hesitated, then quietly said, okay, not enthusiastic, not dismissive, careful, like he was trying to understand where she fit now. Goldie recognized that look instantly. The children weren't intentionally abandoning her. They were adapting to the emotional structure built around them, and that structure had taught them she existed on the outside. After practice, Olivia handed Liam a water bottle automatically. Goldie noticed something important then. Liam accepted it out of habit, not attachment. Habit. There was a difference, and for the first time in months, Goldie saw it clearly. That night, Goldie updated her documentation carefully. Dates, interactions, school involvement, Grant's language patterns, Olivia's positioning, everything. No emotion in the notes, only observation. Daniel Brooks had warned her repeatedly, the calmer you become, the more visible their manipulation becomes. And he was right. 2 days later, Grant confronted her unexpectedly. She was working at the dining table when he walked in from the office. You've been recording things, he said flatly. Goldie looked up slowly. Yes. Grant stared at her. Why Goldie closed her laptop carefully? Because I finally realized I was the only person in this house not protecting myself. Grant's expression darkened. You're making this hostile now. Goldie almost smiled. Hostile. Interesting word coming from the man who spent months replacing his wife psychologically before discussing separation. You made this hostile long before I started paying attention, she replied calmly. Grant stepped closer. You're becoming paranoid. That word would have broken her before. Now it only confirmed the pattern. Gaslight, destabilize, reframe. Goldie leaned back slightly in her chair. No, she said quietly. I'm becoming aware. That sentence hit harder than she expected, because Grant actually looked unsettled. Later that evening, Sophie entered the kitchen while Goldie was cooking. A rare moment alone. No Olivia, no Grant, just mother and daughter. Sophie climbed onto a stool quietly. You're cooking again, she said. Goldie smiled softly. I used to cook every night. Sophie frowned slightly. I know, Goldie paused. Did she... Or had even those memories started fading beneath Olivia's constant presence? Sophie played with the edge of her sleeve. Olivia says you've been sad lately. Goldie looked at her daughter carefully. And what do you think? Sophie hesitated. I think, she whispered, you stopped smiling. That almost broke Goldie. Almost. But instead of collapsing emotionally, she reached over gently and brushed Sophie's hair behind her ear. "I'm trying to find myself again," she said softly. Sophie blinked. "Did you lose yourself?" Goldie swallowed slowly. "Yes." And for the first time in months, she told the truth out loud. That night, Goldie overheard Grant and Olivia arguing quietly in the hallway. Not loudly enough for the children to hear, but enough for her. "She's changing," Olivia whispered. Grant sounded irritated. "What does that mean? She's not reacting emotionally anymore." Silence. Then Grant said something that chilled Goldie completely. "That's a problem." Problem, not because he loved her, because her emotional reactions had been useful, predictable, manageable. And now she was no longer giving them what they expected. Olivia sounded uneasy for the first time. "She's documenting things she said carefully." Grant cursed under his breath. Goldie stood frozen behind the hallway corner. Then Olivia added quietly, "If she stabilizes publicly before separation, the narrative weakens." Narrative. There it was again. Not marriage, not family. Narrative. Everything had become strategy to them, and now their strategy was slipping. Later, alone in her bedroom, Goldie sat in front of the mirror again. But this time, she didn't see a broken woman. She saw someone returning, slowly, painfully, but undeniably. The woman staring back at her looked exhausted, but awake, and awareness was becoming power. Goldie opened her notebook again. Underneath pages of documentation, she wrote one final sentence before closing it. "They needed me emotional because emotional women are easier to erase." Then she underlined it slowly, because she finally understood the truth. Grant and Olivia thought silence meant surrender, but they were wrong. Goldie Stephens had simply stopped fighting emotionally and started preparing strategically. The atmosphere inside the Stephens house changed slowly at first, not visibly, not dramatically, but tension no longer centered around Goldie Stephens' emotional reactions. Now it centered around something far more dangerous, her composure. Because once Goldie stopped collapsing, Grant and Olivia started losing control of the story they had carefully built around her. And the children were beginning to notice. It happened on a Thursday evening. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while Goldie prepared dinner in silence. Liam sat at the counter doing homework. Sophie colored quietly nearby. For once, Olivia Carter wasn't there yet. The house felt strangely lighter without her constant presence filling every emotional gap. Then the front door opened. Grant walked in looking irritated. Not tired. Irritated. That alone told Goldie something had gone wrong. He loosened his tie sharply and tossed his keys onto the counter harder than necessary. "Where's Olivia?" Liam asked automatically. Grant's jaw tightened. "Running late." Goldie noticed the reaction immediately. Interesting. Dinner remained quiet until Sophie looked up suddenly. "Mom helped me with my project today," she said proudly. Grant glanced toward Goldie. "Oh." Sophie nodded enthusiastically. She fixed the whole presentation board. Goldie smiled softly. "You had good ideas already." Sophie beamed. And for the first time in months, Grant looked uncomfortable watching one of the children reconnect with her naturally. Not because he disliked it, because it disrupted the structure he had become used to. Then Liam spoke. "Mum also explained my history assignment better than Olivia did." Silence. A tiny sentence. But Goldie saw the immediate shift in Grant's face. Tiny cracks, tiny disruptions. The children were beginning to remember her role without being directed toward it. And Grant noticed. The front door opened again. Olivia entered carrying takeout bags and her usual carefully balanced smile. "Sorry I'm late," she said lightly, but the energy in the room already felt different. Sophie barely looked up this time. Liam returned to his homework. Goldie calmly continued serving dinner. Olivia hesitated slightly, like she had walked into a conversation she no longer fully controlled. Grant stood abruptly. "You're late," he said sharply. Everyone froze. Even Olivia looked surprised. "I texted you," she replied carefully. Grant rubbed his forehead. "You were supposed to pick up Liam's practice forms. I said traffic was bad." His voice hardened unexpectedly. "You said you'd handle it." The room went silent. Goldie slowly looked up. This was new. Grant never spoke to Olivia this way before, because until now, Olivia had represented control, structure, efficiency. But lately, the structure was slipping. Olivia forced a soft smile. "I can still go back out." Grant exhaled harshly. "Forget it." Liam looked between them awkwardly. Sophie lowered her crayons slowly. And Goldie realized something important in that moment. The children were witnessing tension for the first time, not between Goldie and Grant, between Grant and Olivia. Olivia placed the takeout bags down carefully. "You don't need to snap at me," she said quietly. Grant laughed once under his breath. "I'm snapping because things are getting messy." Messy? Goldie nearly smiled, because now that she wasn't emotionally spiraling anymore, the chaos had nowhere else to go. It was turning on them instead. Olivia crossed her arms slightly. "I've done everything you asked." The second those words left her mouth, the room changed completely. Goldie's eyes lifted slowly. Grant's face hardened instantly. Too late. The sentence had already landed. Everything you asked. Not helped, not supported, directed, structured, planned. Liam frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Olivia immediately recovered. "Nothing, sweetheart." But children noticed tone long before they understood context. And for the first time, Liam looked uncertain around her. Grant spoke quickly. "Everyone's tired, let's just eat." But the illusion had cracked, small, hairline, still fragile, but visible. Later that night, Goldie stood in the hallway while voices echoed faintly from Grant's office. The argument was quieter than before, sharper, more desperate. "She's changing the dynamic," Olivia whispered. Grant sounded frustrated. "Then adapt." "I'm trying," Olivia snapped softly. "But the kids are reconnecting with her naturally now." Goldie closed her eyes briefly. Naturally. That word mattered. Because no one had coached the children toward Goldie. The connection was simply resurfacing once manipulation weakened. Grant lowered his voice. "You said this would stabilize." "It would have," Olivia replied quickly, "if she stayed emotionally reactive." Silence. Then Grant muttered something colder than Goldie expected. "She's ruining months of progress." Progress. Goldie felt ice spread through her chest, not because she was shocked anymore, because hearing it aloud removed all remaining doubt. They had been managing her removal like a project timeline. The next afternoon, Sophie walked into Goldie's room quietly. Goldie looked up from her laptop. "Hey, sweetheart." Sophie hesitated near the doorway, then softly asked, "Are you sad because of Olivia?" The question hung gently between them. Goldie closed the laptop carefully. "What makes you ask that?" Sophie played nervously with her sleeve. "Everything feels weird now." Goldie's heart tightened. Children always knew, maybe not facts, but emotional gravity. And lately, the entire house had shifted around something unstable. Goldie opened her arms slightly. Sophie walked over slowly and climbed beside her on the bed. A small action, but Goldie nearly cried from the weight of it. Because months ago, Sophie would have gone to Olivia first. Now she came here, instinctively. Goldie brushed her daughter's hair back gently. "You never have to choose between people you love," she whispered. Sophie looked up quietly. "But Dad acts different around you." Goldie paused. "Careful." measured, because this moment mattered. He's confused, she said softly. Sophie frowned. About what? Goldie swallowed slowly. About what matters. That night, Liam surprised her too. He knocked lightly on her bedroom door. Goldie looked up from paperwork. Yeah? Liam stood awkwardly in the doorway. Can you help me with something? Her chest tightened slightly. Of course, Liam entered slowly. I think Olivia gave me the wrong deadline for my project, he admitted. Goldie reviewed the assignment sheet, then calmly explained the mistake. Liam watched her carefully the entire time. Finally, he asked quietly, How did you know that so fast? Goldie smiled faintly. I used to help you with everything before. Liam looked down, and for the first time in months, he looked guilty. Downstairs later, Grant confronted Olivia again. Goldie overheard fragments from the hallway. The kids are pulling away, Olivia whispered tensely. Grant sounded furious now. Then fix it. I can't force emotional attachment. Silence. Then Olivia added quietly, They're remembering her. That sentence changed everything. Because Goldie realized something powerful then. She had spent months believing love could be erased by manipulation, but real love didn't disappear. It waited underneath confusion, underneath influence, underneath fear, and now it was resurfacing. That night, Goldie stood alone in the kitchen after everyone went upstairs. The house felt different, still tense, still fractured, but different. For the first time in months, she no longer felt invisible. Not fully, not anymore, because the children were beginning to see the cracks themselves, and once children start questioning the narrative adults build around them, control becomes impossible to maintain forever. Goldie looked toward the dark hallway upstairs and whispered quietly, You taught them to forget me. Then her eyes hardened, but they're starting to remember. The illusion finally began breaking on a Sunday afternoon. Not through a dramatic confession, not through a courtroom revelation, but through exhaustion. Because lies become harder to maintain when everyone involved starts cracking under the weight of them. And Grant Stephens was cracking first. The house had become tense in ways even the children could now feel. Conversations stopped when people entered rooms. Olivia Carter smiled less naturally. Grant's patience disappeared faster each day. In Goldie Stephens, she had become terrifyingly calm, not passive, not defeated, calm in the way storms become calm before they destroy something. That afternoon, Liam and Sophie were upstairs while Grant and Olivia argued quietly in the kitchen. At least they thought they were quiet. But children notice more than adults realize, especially when the emotional temperature inside a house changes every day. Goldie was folding laundry in her bedroom when she heard voices rise downstairs, then footsteps. Quick, nervous. She opened the door slightly and saw Liam standing halfway down the staircase, listening. Sophie stood behind him silently. Their faces already looked uneasy. Too old suddenly. Too aware. Downstairs, Olivia's voice cut through the tension. I'm telling you, this is falling apart. Grant sounded furious. Because you stopped managing it properly. Goldie froze. Managing it. Not family, not relationships, management. Olivia lowered her voice sharply. I cannot force your children to stop reconnecting with their mother. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Liam's face changed first. Confusion. Then shock. Goldie felt her heartbeat slow because the truth had finally escaped the cage they built around it. Grant cursed under his breath. You said they were stabilizing. They were, Olivia snapped quietly, until Goldie stopped reacting. Goldie saw Sophie grip the staircase railing tighter. Children didn't understand legal strategy, but they understood tone. And this tone sounded ugly, calculated, wrong. Grant's voice turned colder. We were close to finishing this. Finishing. Liam frowned deeply now. Olivia crossed her arms. She's not unstable anymore, Olivia whispered harshly. You can't keep pushing that narrative when she's calmer than both of us. Narrative. That word landed like broken glass in the silence. Goldie saw Liam slowly turn towards Sophie. Both children looked pale, because suddenly the emotional confusion of the past months started rearranging itself into understanding. Not complete understanding, but enough. Enough to feel manipulated, enough to feel used. Goldie stepped back into her room quietly before they noticed her watching. A few seconds later, she heard quick footsteps upstairs, Liam and Sophie disappearing into their rooms, silent, disturbed, and downstairs. The argument continued. That evening, dinner was painfully awkward. Olivia tried smiling, tried asking Liam about school, tried complimenting Sophie's drawing, but something fundamental had shifted. The children no longer leaned toward her automatically. Now they watched her carefully, like they were trying to compare two versions of reality in their minds. Grant noticed immediately. Is something wrong? He asked Liam. Liam shrugged without looking up. No. But his tone was distant. Sophie barely spoke at all. And for the first time in months, Olivia looked uncertain at the dinner table. Not graceful uncertainty. Fear. Halfway through dinner, Sophie suddenly asked, "What does narrative mean?" The entire room froze. Grant's fork stopped moving. Olivia's face lost color for half a second. Goldie stayed perfectly still. Grant forced a smile. Why are you asking that? Sophie looked down at her plate. I heard you say it earlier. Silence. Heavy, dangerous silence. Olivia recovered first. It's just an adult work word, she said softly. But Liam finally looked up. No, he said quietly. You said Mom was part of a narrative. Goldie saw panic flicker across Grant's face. Real panic. Because manipulation only works when children don't realize they're being guided emotionally. And now they were starting to see it. Grant cleared his throat. You misunderstood the conversation. Liam stared at him. Did I? That single question shifted the entire room, because Liam had never challenged Grant directly before. Never. Olivia tried softening her voice again. Nobody was trying to hurt your mom. Sophie finally spoke. But you kept saying she was emotional. Olivia blinked. Grant answered quickly. She has been emotional lately. Goldie finally lifted her eyes slowly. No, she said calmly. I was hurt. Silence. Not explosive, not loud, but devastatingly honest. The children looked at her differently then. Not confused, not unstable, just hurt. A mother who had been quietly bleeding while everyone around her described the bleeding as a personality flaw. Liam pushed his plate away suddenly. Did you guys try to make us stop spending time with Mom? Grant immediately answered. Of course not. Too fast, too defensive. And Liam noticed. Children always notice when adults answer too quickly. Sophie looked toward Olivia. Why were you always around instead of Mum? Olivia hesitated. A fatal hesitation. Goldie watched it happen in real time, the moment children begin recognizing artificial closeness, the moment emotional manipulation stops feeling comforting and starts feeling invasive. I was only helping, Olivia whispered. But now even her softness sounded rehearsed. Liam stood up first. I'm going upstairs. Grant frowned. Sit down. No. The room froze again, because Liam never said no to his father. Not like that, not directly, but now his eyes looked different, less trusting, more awake. Sophie followed him quietly without finishing dinner, and suddenly the entire structure Grant and Olivia spent months building started collapsing right in front of them. Not legally, emotionally, which was far worse. The second the children disappeared upstairs, Grant turned sharply toward Olivia. "This is exactly what I was trying to avoid." Goldie almost laughed. Avoid? Interesting word from the man who engineered emotional displacement inside his own family. Olivia looked shaken now. "You told me they'd never hear us," Grant snapped back. "Well, they did." Goldie stood slowly from the table. Neither of them stopped her. Neither of them even looked at her immediately. Because for the first time, they were no longer managing Goldie. They were dealing with consequences. Upstairs, Goldie found Sophie curled up on the bed, crying quietly. The sight nearly shattered her. Not because Sophie finally understood everything, because she understood enough. And childhood should never carry this kind of emotional confusion. Goldie sat beside her gently. Sophie looked up with red eyes. "Were they trying to replace you?" The question broke something deep inside Goldie. Not because it hurt, because a child should never have to ask it. Goldie brushed tears from Sophie's cheeks softly. No one can replace a mother who truly loves her children. Sophie started crying harder. "I thought you stopped loving us." That sentence almost destroyed Goldie completely. But instead of collapsing, she pulled Sophie into her arms tightly. "I never stopped," she whispered. "Not for 1 second." At the doorway, Liam stood silently watching. His face looked older somehow, like trust had aged overnight. Finally, he asked quietly, "Did Dad lie to us?" Goldie closed her eyes briefly, then answered carefully, "Your father made choices that hurt people." Liam looked downstairs toward the faint sound of arguing voices, and for the first time in months, he didn't look toward Olivia for comfort. He looked at his mother. Downstairs, Grant and Olivia continued tearing apart the illusion they built together. But upstairs, the children were finally beginning to see the truth. And once children see manipulation clearly, they never fully trust it again. Goldie held Sophie close while Liam sat quietly beside them. And in the silence of that room, one devastating realization settled over all three of them. The family hadn't broken because love disappeared. It broke because control replaced honesty. After the children overheard the argument, the atmosphere inside the Stephens house changed permanently. Not suddenly, not explosively, but irreversibly. Because once Liam and Sophie started questioning the adults around them, the emotional structure Grant Stephens had carefully built began collapsing from the inside, and no amount of control could fully repair it. The next morning felt painfully artificial. Grant sat at the breakfast table pretending everything was normal. Olivia Carter stood near the stove making coffee in tense silence. Liam barely touched his food. Sophie stayed close to Goldie Stephens without realizing she was doing it. Small things. But Grant noticed every single one. "Big day today," Grant said too casually. No one answered. Olivia forced a soft smile. "Sophie, do you still want help with your presentation later?" Sophie hesitated, then quietly said, "I think Mom's helping me." The silence afterward was brutal. Goldie saw Olivia's expression flicker for half a second. Not heartbreak, fear, because emotional distance had been Olivia's leverage, and the children were pulling away from her now instinctively. Grant stepped in immediately. Olivia was only trying to help. Liam looked up finally. "We know." His tone wasn't angry. That made it worse. It sounded disappointed. Grant's jaw tightened. "You're misunderstanding adult conversations." Liam stared at him for a moment, then quietly asked, "Were you trying to make us think Mom was unstable?" The room froze completely. Goldie didn't move. Olivia stopped breathing for a second. And Grant, for the first time in months, looked cornered. "That's ridiculous," Grant said sharply. Too sharply. Liam flinched slightly. Goldie noticed immediately. So did Grant. But instead of apologizing, he doubled down. You kids don't understand what's happening. Sophie looked toward Goldie quietly. Then explain it. That question destroyed the remaining illusion of authority in the room. Because children only ask for explanations when trust begins collapsing, Grant stood abruptly. We are not discussing this at the table. But Liam stood too. No, he said quietly. You just don't want us asking questions. Goldie almost stopped breathing. Because this wasn't rebellion. This was awakening. Olivia stepped forward carefully. Liam, your father is stressed, Liam interrupted her for the first time ever. Stop acting like you're part of this family. Silence. Absolute silence. Olivia's face lost color instantly. Goldie felt Sophie move closer beside her instinctively, and Grant looked furious. That's enough, Grant snapped. But Liam didn't sit down, didn't back away. Instead, he looked directly at his father. You kept telling us Mom was emotional. Grant rubbed his forehead aggressively. She was emotional. Goldie finally spoke. Because I was being replaced in front of my children. No yelling, no tears, just truth. And truth sounded devastatingly powerful after months of manipulation. Olivia looked shaken now, not graceful, not composed, shaken, because she had built her role inside the family on emotional ambiguity. And ambiguity disappears once children start seeing clearly. Later that afternoon, Goldie met Daniel Brooks at his office again. This time, she brought updated notes about the children overhearing Grant and Olivia's argument. Daniel listened carefully, then leaned back slowly. This changes things significantly. Goldie nodded. I know. Daniel studied her. The children are beginning to identify manipulation independently. Courts pay attention to emotional coaching and parental alienation concerns. Parental alienation. Finally, a name for the nightmare she had been living. Daniel opened another file. There's more. Goldie looked up. Grant's legal team requested preliminary custody positioning this morning. Goldie's stomach tightened slightly. So it's official now? Daniel nodded. Yes. Silence filled the office. Then Daniel added carefully, but honestly, I think his control over this situation is weakening fast. Goldie looked down briefly. He's losing the children emotionally. Daniel nodded slowly. And emotionally disconnected children rarely support the parent they stop trusting. That evening, Grant arrived home visibly angry. Not controlled anger anymore. Fractured anger. The kind that leaks through posture and tone no matter how carefully someone tries to hide it. Olivia followed behind him silently. Goldie immediately noticed something different. They weren't standing close together anymore. Not emotionally, not strategically. Distance had entered their dynamic too. Liam and Sophie were in the living room watching television quietly. Neither greeted Olivia. Neither moved toward her. The absence of affection felt louder than rejection. Grant looked around the room. What's going on with everyone lately? Liam muted the television. You mean after we found out you've been manipulating Mom? Goldie saw Grant physically tense. Manipulating? He repeated sharply. Yes, Liam replied. That's what it sounded like. Grant laughed harshly. Your children. You don't understand adult complexity. Sophie looked at him carefully. But we understand when someone's being hurt. That sentence hit the room like shattered glass. Olivia stepped in softly. Nobody wanted anyone hurt. Goldie looked directly at her for the first time all day. Then why did you stay? Olivia froze. The question wasn't loud, but it was impossible to escape. Goldie continued calmly. You watched a mother disappear from her own family and called it structure. Olivia's eyes flickered downward. For the first time since this began, She looked ashamed, real shame. Not strategic softness, not controlled empathy. Shame. Grant immediately became defensive. This isn't all on Olivia. Goldie turned toward him slowly. No, she said quietly. It's mostly on you. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then Liam stood up suddenly. I don't want Olivia coming to my games anymore. Olivia looked stunned. Liam? No, he interrupted quietly. I think you made things confusing. Sophie nodded softly beside him. I want Mom there. Grant looked genuinely panicked now, because this wasn't just emotional discomfort anymore. This was collapse. The children were choosing. And the choice wasn't him. Later that night, Goldie overheard another argument upstairs. This one louder, messier, more desperate. You said they trusted me, Olivia whispered angrily. Grant snapped back. They did until you lost control. Olivia laughed bitterly. Me? You built this entire situation. Goldie stood silently in the hallway, listening, not emotionally destroyed anymore, just awake. Then Olivia said something that changed everything. I gave up my reputation for this, Grant scoffed. And I'm losing my family. Silence. Then Olivia whispered, You already lost them. That sentence echoed through the hallway like a verdict, because deep down, everyone finally knew it was true. The next morning, Olivia didn't come over. No messages, no calls, no carefully timed appearances, just absence. And the house immediately felt different, lighter, sadder, honest. Sophie sat beside Goldie at breakfast quietly, then suddenly asked, Are you leaving us? Goldie's heart nearly broke. She reached for Sophie's hand gently. No, she whispered. I'm fighting for us. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Even after everything, Goldie smiled sadly. That's what mothers do. Across the table, Liam looked at her differently now. Not distant, not confused, certain. And Grant noticed. God, he noticed. Because for months, he believed emotional influence could permanently replace maternal love. But now the illusion was collapsing right in front of him, and no amount of strategy could undo what the children finally understood. Goldie Stephens was never unstable. She was betrayed. That night, Grant stood alone in the kitchen while Goldie quietly helped Sophie finish homework. Liam sat nearby talking to her about school again. Simple moments, normal moments, the kind Grant once took for granted. Now he watched them like someone staring through glass at a life he no longer controlled. And for the first time since this began, Grant Stephens looked afraid. The final collapse of the Stephens marriage didn't happen in court. It happened quietly over ordinary moments that could no longer be manipulated. A son choosing to sit beside his mother again. A daughter reaching for Goldie's hand instead of Olivia's. Silence replacing control. Truth replacing narrative. And Grant Stephens realizing too late that emotional loyalty cannot be engineered forever. 2 weeks later, the custody hearing arrived. The courthouse downtown felt cold and sterile, all polished floors and controlled voices. But Goldie Stephens walked through the building with a calmness that surprised even her. Not because she wasn't afraid, because fear no longer controlled her decisions. Liam walked beside her quietly. Sophie held her hand tightly. Grant stood near the courtroom doors with his attorney. Alone, Olivia Carter was nowhere in sight. Goldie noticed immediately. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just inevitability. Because relationships built through emotional destruction rarely survive once consequences arrive. Grant approached carefully. You brought the kids, he asked quietly. Goldie nodded. They asked to come. Grant looked toward Liam and Sophie. Neither child moved toward him immediately. That hesitation alone seemed to wound him more deeply than any legal document ever could. Inside the courtroom, everything became painfully formal. Custody evaluations, financial disclosures, behavioral assessments, cold language describing emotional devastation. Daniel Brooks remained calm beside Goldie, while Grant's legal team attempted to frame months of conflict as marital instability. But now the structure underneath the manipulation was visible, and once manipulation becomes visible, it loses power quickly. Daniel presented the documentation methodically. School records showing Goldie's exclusion from parental communication, financial movements made secretly by Grant, messages revealing coordinated emotional positioning, descriptions of Olivia being integrated as a secondary caregiver before formal separation discussions ever occurred. The courtroom grew quieter with every page. Then came the moment Goldie never expected. Liam asked to speak privately with the court-appointed family evaluator. Grant's face changed instantly. Panic. Real panic. Because control works best when children stay emotionally confused, and Liam was no longer confused. An hour later, the evaluator returned with careful professionalism, but her tone had shifted noticeably. The children expressed concerns regarding emotional manipulation within the household dynamic, she stated calmly. Grant looked stunned. Goldie stayed still. The evaluator continued. Specifically, they described feeling encouraged to emotionally distance themselves from their mother, while another adult figure was gradually integrated into parental roles. Silence filled the courtroom. Grant's attorney immediately objected, but the damage was already done, because the truth had finally entered the room officially. Later, outside the courtroom during recess, Grant approached Goldie again. This time he looked exhausted, older somehow. "I never wanted this to happen," he said quietly. Goldie stared at him for a long moment, then finally asked the question she had carried for months. Which part? Grant blinked. "The divorce," Goldie shook her head slowly. "No, the erasing." That word hit him harder than she expected, because deep down, he knew exactly what she meant. Grant rubbed his forehead. It got complicated. Goldie almost smiled sadly. "No," she said softly. "You made it strategic." Silence. Grant looked away first. Again. That afternoon, the preliminary custody outcome became clear. Shared custody would remain temporarily in place, but Goldie's parental standing had been fully restored in the court's view. The emotional instability narrative collapsed completely, and Olivia Carter's involvement was officially recognized as inappropriate overreach during marital deterioration. Daniel leaned toward Goldie afterward. "You did something very difficult," he said quietly. Goldie looked toward Liam and Sophie sitting nearby. "No," she whispered. "I survived something difficult." Outside the courthouse, rain fell lightly across the city streets. Grant stood near the steps watching his family from a distance, but it no longer looked like his family. Not fully, not anymore, because emotional authority had shifted, and he knew it. Sophie ran toward Goldie first. "Can we go get pancakes?" she asked softly. Goldie laughed for what felt like the first genuine time in years. "Absolutely." Liam walked beside them quietly, then suddenly said, "I'm sorry." Goldie stopped walking. For what Liam looked down briefly, for believing them, that nearly shattered her. Goldie pulled him into her arms immediately. "You were a child," she whispered. "None of this was your fault." "And for the first time in months," Liam cried, not because he was weak, because children break too when families become emotional battlegrounds. Weeks later, the house finally changed. Not emotionally, physically. Grant moved into a luxury apartment downtown. Olivia disappeared from their lives completely. No goodbye, No explanation, just absence, which somehow felt fitting, because Olivia was never the true center of the destruction. She was simply the tool Grant used to avoid confronting his own emptiness. Goldie stayed in the family home temporarily while rebuilding her career. Her freelance marketing work expanded faster than expected. Old clients returned, new opportunities appeared, and slowly, piece by piece, Goldie Stephens rebuilt an identity outside of being someone's wife. The children changed too. Liam became quieter but more emotionally honest. Sophie clung to Goldie for weeks before slowly relaxing again. Healing wasn't dramatic. It happened in ordinary moments, movie nights, school pickups, cooking together, trust returning one small interaction at a time. One evening, months later, Goldie stood alone on the back patio watching the sunset spill gold across the same neighborhood where she once felt invisible. Now it looked different, not because the world changed, because she had. Her phone buzzed softly, a message from Grant. "I miss the life we had." Goldie stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly typed, "You didn't lose me when you cheated. You lost me when you taught our children to question my place in their lives." She pressed send, no anger, no revenge, just truth. And truth no longer needed to scream to be powerful. Inside the house, Sophie laughed loudly at something Liam said. The sound pulled Goldie back inside, back toward real life, not the performance she spent months surviving. Real life, messy, healing, honest. That night, Sophie curled beside her on the couch. "Mom." "Yeah, sweetheart." Sophie looked up sleepily. "We chose you." Goldie felt tears burn her eyes instantly, not because she won, because love survived, even after manipulation, even after betrayal, even after months of emotional confusion. Love survived. Goldie kissed the top of Sophie's head gently, and in that moment she realized something profound. Grant spent months trying to replace her. But motherhood rooted in genuine love cannot be replaced by performance. Not permanently, not truly. Later, after the children fell asleep, Goldie walked through the quiet house slowly. The same kitchen where she once felt erased. The same hallway where she overheard strategies designed to remove her. The same living room where she cried silently while everyone else adapted around her pain. Now the silence felt different. Not lonely, peaceful. Goldie stopped at the front door before turning off the lights. For years, she believed saving the marriage was the same thing as saving her family. She had been wrong. Sometimes saving your family means refusing to disappear inside a toxic version of love. And sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding yourself so completely that the people who broke you can no longer recognize the woman standing in front of them. Goldie smiled softly to herself, not because everything healed perfectly, but because she finally belonged to herself again. And no one would ever take that from her twice. Some betrayals don't happen all at once. They happen slowly through silence, dismissal, emotional manipulation, and the painful feeling of becoming invisible in places where you once felt loved. Goldie's story is a reminder that not all wounds leave bruises people can see. Sometimes the deepest heartbreak comes from being replaced emotionally before you are ever left physically. But this story is also about something stronger than betrayal self-worth. A kind woman is not a weak woman. Loving deeply does not mean you deserve to be erased, controlled, or emotionally diminished. And staying silent to keep the peace often destroys peace inside your own soul. Goldie spent years sacrificing herself for her marriage, believing loyalty alone could hold a family together. But real love cannot survive where respect disappears. What saved her in the end was not revenge, it was awakening. The moment she stopped begging to be chosen, she began choosing herself. And that changed everything. Healing is not loud. Sometimes healing looks like setting boundaries, like rebuilding your identity after losing yourself in someone else's world. Like realizing your children don't need a perfect mother, they need an honest, emotionally safe one. Like understanding that the people who manipulate others often mistake kindness for weakness until the person they underestimated finally walks away. If this story touched you, let it remind you of something important. You should never have to compete for respect inside a relationship that claims to love you. And if someone only realizes your value after losing you, that loss belongs to them, not to you. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to rebuild yourself after emotional betrayal? And if you believe healing stories matter, don't forget to subscribe and stay for more powerful emotional journeys like this one.